Today is March 21st, 2026. Hey everyone, welcome back to Now Michael channel. The AI world has been absolutely packed with political drama, powerful new models, export busts, deepfake crime, and even a horror book scandal. We've got 10 big stories to cover, so let's jump straight in. Let's start with the biggest policy move of the week. Stories 1 and 2 are tightly connected. They're both about the Trump administration's new push to reshape US AI regulation at the federal level. The first story comes from Engadget Tech News, published March 20th, 2026. The second comes from The Verge's AI section, also on March 20th, 2026. According to Engadget, the White House has released a new AI policy framework that basically says, Congress, we want one big federal AI law that overrides what the states are doing. The White House is arguing that a patchwork of state laws is bad for innovation and will hurt the US in the global AI race. So they're asking Congress to preempt or overrule state-level AI regulations. The Verge's coverage describes this as a 7-point plan that's very clear on two things. First, the federal government should avoid heavy AI regulation, except for some specific child safety rules. Second, states should be blocked from interfering with what the administration calls a national strategy to achieve global AI dominance. So what's actually in this framework? From Engadget's reporting on child privacy and safety, the White House wants Congress to require tools like screen time controls, content exposure controls, and account controls for minors, and it wants to explicitly confirm that existing child privacy rules also apply when AI is in the mix. States would still be allowed to enforce their general child protection laws, like bans on child sexual abuse material, even if it's AI generated. But they wouldn't be allowed to directly regulate AI development itself in ways that could burden lawful users. On the infrastructure side, the framework is more worried about the cost of data centers than climate impacts. It wants to make sure electricity price spikes from AI data centers don't get dumped on local residents, and it wants to streamline permitting so companies can build their own on-site power. On the software side, it's very pro-innovation. Things like regulatory sandboxes for AI applications and a push for Congress to make federal datasets more accessible in AI-ready formats for industry and academia. On content and liability, things get more controversial. The framework says Congress should prevent the US government from coercing tech companies, including AI providers, into banning or changing content based on partisan or ideological agendas. It leans toward protecting AI companies from liability for what users do with their models. So, if someone misuses an AI system for illegal or harmful purposes, the model provider shouldn't be held responsible in most scenarios. Engadget points out how problematic this is, given real-world harms we're already seeing. AI being used to generate sexual images of children, or allegedly contributing to user suicides. Critics say you can't talk about safety and then strip away accountability at the same time. On copyright, the White House takes a familiar line. It says it believes training AI models on copyrighted material does not violate copyright law, but it also wants courts, not Congress, to ultimately settle that question. At the same time, it suggests Congress should look at enabling licensing frameworks so copyright holders can negotiate compensation from AI companies. And this all comes with the key clincher Engadget highlights. Federal rules should preempt state laws, so states don't regulate AI development directly, don't unduly burden lawful AI use, and don't punish AI companies for third-party misuse. Samir Jain from the Center for Democracy and Technology, quoted by Engadget, calls out the internal contradictions. On one hand, The administration says the government shouldn't pressure AI providers over content. On the other hand, critics argue that its own woke AI executive order does exactly that. It also says states shouldn't regulate AI development, but then admits states need to keep their traditional enforcement powers. The Verge sums it up as a blueprint that wants minimal federal restrictions, a narrow focus on child safety and infrastructure costs, and strong federal preemption to stop states from going further. So the big theme here, the US is trying to centralize AI policy at the federal level, keep regulation relatively light, and present this as key to global AI dominance, but at the cost of weakening state-level protections that are currently leading the fight on AI harms. Next, let's pivot from government policy to national security and AI companies. This story comes from Wired's Artificial Intelligence section, published March 21st, 2026. Wired reports on a pretty explosive allegation. The US Department of Defense has raised concerns that Anthropic, the company behind Claude, could, in theory, sabotage its own models during wartime or conflict. In other words, the DoD is worried that if Anthropic's models are used in military or critical infrastructure contexts, the company might be able to flip a switch and alter or disable behavior mid-conflict. Anthropic, according to Wired, strongly denies this. Company executives say that the way their models are deployed, they can't just secretly reach in and manipulate systems on demand, especially in the middle of war. They argue that the models, once released into certain environments, don't give Anthropic that kind of live unilateral control. This story speaks to a bigger theme that ties right back to our first story. As governments lean more on private AI companies for critical tasks, they're also getting nervous about how much control those companies have and whether that control could be abused or even just perceived as a national security risk. So we've got the White House trying to shield AI providers from liability and overregulation, while other parts of the US government worry about those same companies being too powerful or too central to military operations. Now, let's talk about NVIDIA, because they are in the news for two very different reasons: OpenAI models and alleged export crimes. First, the positive tech story. This news comes from MarkTech Post AI News, published March 20th, 2026. NVIDIA has released Nemotron-Cascade 2, an open-weight 32 billion parameter mixture of experts model, with only about 3 billion parameters active at any given time. MarkTech Post highlights that this design is all about intelligence density, getting strong reasoning and agent-like capabilities without needing the massive parameter counts of frontier closed models. According to MarkTech Post, Nemotron-Cascade 2 is open-weight, so researchers and companies can actually inspect and build on it. It's a 30B MOE, but with 3B active parameters, giving it efficiency that's appealing for real-world deployment. It's good enough to hit gold medal level performance in the 2025 benchmarks they cite. The big takeaway: NVIDIA isn't just selling GPUs. They're trying to own the model layer, especially for reasoning and agentic workflows, in a way that's more open than some of the big closed labs. That's important context when we talk about hardware exports. Now, the darker side of the NVIDIA story. This comes from Engadget Tech News again, published March 20th, 2026. Engadget reports that the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York has charged 3 people with illegally exporting NVIDIA GPUs to China, allegedly violating the Export Control Reform Act. The accused are Yishan Wally Liao, a senior VP and board member at Supermicro Computer, Ruwei Cang Stephen Chang, a sales manager in Taiwan, and Tingwei Willie Sun, a contractor. According to Engadget's summary of the indictment, these 3 allegedly created fake orders from Southeast Asian companies for servers that contain NVIDIA chips, shipped the actual hardware secretly to China, used the logistics company in Taiwan to repackage the servers, stage dummy servers for inspection by their own compliance team, and falsified records. So Supermicro's internal systems didn't show where the servers were really going. The DOJ claims this scheme enabled about $2.5 billion worth of illegal server purchases between 2024 and 2025. Supermicro itself is not named as a defendant, but as Engadget notes, its stock price took a hit when this came out. The company has since put the two employees on administrative leave and cut off the contractor. Engadget also reminds us this isn't isolated. After the Trump administration tightened export controls on advanced AI chips, about $1 billion worth of NVIDIA AI chips were reportedly sold illegally in just 3 months. And in December 2025, Texas authorities seized over $50 million in GPUs bound for China. So the pattern is clear. As AI demand explodes and US export rules tighten, a black market ecosystem is emerging around high-end GPUs. NVIDIA is at the center of both the legitimate AI boom, like Nemotron-Cascade 2, and the shadow economy that's trying to route around US controls. Let's zoom out from hardware to how AI is being misused on the ground. This story comes from Tech News in Taiwan, published March 21st, 2026. The article in Chinese describes a disturbing trend. More and more young women are being recruited as so-called AI face models and then unknowingly pulled into deepfake-driven fraud and cross-border crime. The basic pattern, as Tech News reports, is this. Scammers advertise seemingly legitimate AI model jobs, where women license their faces or likenesses to be used in AI training or virtual content. In reality, these faces are used to generate deepfake videos and images that fuel scams, things like romance fraud, investment scams, or fake customer service reps. The young women often don't fully understand how their faces will be used, and in some cases, they become unwitting accomplices in transnational fraud operations. This story connects directly back to the US policy debate. On one side, we have frameworks that emphasize innovation and warn against over-regulating AI development. On the other, we see very real harms, deepfake-driven scams, identity exploitation, and people, often young women, being turned into tools of crime without grasping the consequences. It's a reminder that AI safety isn't just about big models and national security. It's also about everyday people getting pulled into a digital underground they can't see. Next up, let's talk about how AI is changing software engineering from the inside. This story comes from a WeChat article on mp.weisin.qq.com, published March 21st, 2026. The article, in Chinese, digs into something called harness engineering at OpenAI. The core idea: OpenAI is trying to move from humans directly writing and editing code to humans designing environments where agents can reliably operate and improve. In other words, instead of an engineer just writing a feature end-to-end, their job becomes designing the harness around an AI agent, the tools it can use, the constraints, the feedback loops, the evaluation metrics, the guardrails. The agent then does more of the hands-on coding, debugging, and experimentation inside that harness. The WeChat article argues that OpenAI engineers are increasingly defining tasks and workflows as agent-friendly problems, building robust evaluation pipelines so agents can be trusted in production, and treating AI models as co-workers whose environment needs to be carefully architected. This is a big paradigm shift. It links directly to models like NVIDIA's Nemotron-Cascade 2 and, as we'll see in a moment, MiniMax M27, both of which emphasize agentic capabilities and complex tool use. The whole industry is moving toward AI not just answering questions, but acting as semi-autonomous workers inside structured systems. Staying in the developer world, there's a practical story for anyone building domain-specific AI. This one comes from the Hugging Face blog, published March 20th, 2026, in collaboration with NVIDIA. The blog post, titled Build a Domain-Specific Embedding Model in Under a Day, walks through how you can fine-tune embeddings for your specific domain using NVIDIA hardware and Hugging Face tools. Even though the summary we have is short, the key message is you don't have to rely on generic one-size-fits-all embeddings anymore. With modern tooling, you can take a base model and, in less than a day, adapt it for your specific data, legal text, medical notes, financial reports, internal documentation, you name it. That means better retrieval, better search, and more accurate RAG systems, because the embedding space actually reflects your domain's language and concepts. This ties into everything else we've been talking about, open models like Nemotron-Cascade 2, agent frameworks at OpenAI, and upcoming self-evolving models. All of them benefit massively from high-quality, domain-tuned embeddings. Now, let's jump into the cultural side of AI. This story comes from Ars Technica's AI coverage, published March 20th, 2026. Ars Technica reports that major publisher Hachette has pulled a horror novel titled Shy Girl after multiple allegations that the author used AI tools heavily in its creation. The author denies using AI in the way critics suggest, but the controversy blew up enough that Hachette decided to yank the book anyway. Ars describes this as one of the first major controversies of its kind in mainstream publishing. Why does this matter? We're entering a world where readers, reviewers, and publishers are starting to scrutinize text for AI fingerprints. There's a growing sense that readers want transparency. Was this written by a human, by AI, or by some hybrid process? And publishers are clearly nervous about reputational damage if they're seen as quietly pushing AI-generated or AI-assisted work without disclosure. This connects back to policy debates about copyright and training data. If AI models are trained on copyrighted books and then used to generate new books, who owns what? And how should that be labeled to readers? Ars Technica's story suggests we're at the beginning of a new era of AI authenticity scandals in creative industries. Finally, let's talk about one of the most technically ambitious announcements of the week. This story comes from Dev Community, published March 21st, 2026. MiniMax has released M2.7, which they describe as the first self-evolving reasoning model, and it's available right now on BlockRun. According to the DEV community post, here's what makes M2.7 different. It's not just a better chatbot. The model is designed to act as an agent that actively improves its own harness, the structures and workflows around it, through recursive self-improvement loops. It doesn't just run tasks. It analyzes how those tasks are run, then refines tools, strategies, and workflows over many iterations. In practice, the post claims around 97% skill adherence across more than 40 complex skills, each over 2,000 tokens, about 30% performance gains from recursive harness optimization over 100 plus iteration cycles, and the ability to autonomously handle 30 to 50% of research workflows. On benchmarks, the dev article says M2.7 matches or challenges closed models like GPT-5X and Claude Opus on engineering-heavy benchmarks like SWE Pro, 5 Pro, Terminal Bench, and various multi-repo and multilingual coding tasks. It scores a GDP val AA ELO of 1,495, which the post claims is the highest among open source models it compares against. It performs strongly on tool-use benchmarks like Toolathon and MMClaw, and on MLE-style competitions with a high virtual medal rate. Operationally, M27 is built with native agent teams, meaning multi-agent collaboration is built into the model's design, not just layered on top. Stronger character consistency and emotional intelligence for interactive apps, deep reasoning over financial documents, and production debugging skills that, according to the post, can resolve incidents in under 3 minutes. Pricing-wise, the dev community article emphasizes pay per request using USDC on base via BlockRun, no API key, no subscription, no minimum spend, and token prices that they claim are dramatically cheaper than top-tier closed models. You can access it via a direct HTTP API at blockrun.ai, a Python SDK, a TypeScript SDK, or an OpenAI compatible router called Claw Router that plugs into frameworks like LangChain, CrewAI, AutoGen, and others. This model is the perfect bookend to our earlier story about OpenAI's harness engineering. OpenAI is rethinking engineering as designing robust agent environments. MiniMax M27 is a model that tries to improve those environments itself. NVIDIA's Nemotron-Cascade 2 is another step in this agentic direction, focusing on reasoning and efficiency. So you can see a clear trend. The frontier is shifting from big models that answer questions to models that behave like improving, collaborating software agents. Pulling it all together, from Engadget and The Verge, we see the Trump administration pushing a national AI strategy that wants light regulation, strong federal preemption, and powerful protections for AI providers, while critics warn about contradictions and real harms. From Wired's coverage of Anthropic, we see how governments are simultaneously worried about putting too much critical power in the hands of private AI companies, especially in war. From MarkTech Post and Engadget's other article, NVIDIA is at the center of both AI progress, open models like Nemotron-Cascade 2, and geopolitical tension, with billions in GPUs allegedly being smuggled around US export rules. From Tech News, we're reminded that AI harms are not abstract. Deepfake-driven fraud is pulling young women into cross-border crime under the label of AI face modeling. From the WeChat piece on OpenAI and the Hugging Face blog, we see how AI is changing the craft of engineering itself, moving toward agents, harnesses, and domain-specific intelligence you can build in a day. From Ars Technica, we see culture and trust starting to crack in publishing, as accusations of AI use can now kill a book deal and spark public backlash. And from dev community's coverage of MiniMax M27, we see an emerging class of self-optimizing reasoning agents that could automate huge chunks of complex work and raise brand new questions about control, accountability, and safety. If you want to dive deeper, check out Engadget Tech News and The Verge AI for the full breakdown of the White House framework. Read Wired's artificial intelligence section for the Anthropic and DoD story. Visit MarkTech Post for technical details on Nemotron-Cascade 2. See Engadget's full report on the NVIDIA GPU export case. For the deepfake crime story, head to Tech News. The OpenAI harness engineering deep dive is on WeChat at mp.wason.qq.com. The Hugging Face blog has the full tutorial on domain-specific embeddings. Ars Technica AI covers the Shy Girl novel controversy. And Dev Community has MiniMax's full announcement and code snippets for M27 on BlockRun. That's it for today's AI News Roundup for March 21st, 2026. If you found this useful, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the world of AI, where policy, hardware, culture, and code are all colliding in real time. Thanks for watching Now Michael channel, and I'll see you in the next one.